Warning: some contents may be disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. I have been a driver for both Uber and Lyft in the past, since around the time that I turned 20, and I've honestly loved it. It's been a fantastic way to make extra money when I needed it, and I love the whole work when you want thing that they have going on. Yes, I know I sound like a walking advertisement. Trust me, I'm not. And while it is a great way to make extra cash, if you have a good car and live in a good area, there are absolutely some really messed up people out there. That's the biggest issue I have with working with these services. Most of the time, I'd say around 99.99% of the time, you get normal people that just need a quick ride to wherever it is that they're going. Then, that 0.01% comes along and makes you seriously second-guess everything in life. This story involves that 0.01%, that tiny bit of population that terrifies the living hell out of me. And this story is actually one of the reasons that I stopped driving for a while. I have since gone back to doing it, but you'll get why I decided to take a break by the end. I remember that this was one of those ride pings that I would look forward to. Those ones where you get the message saying that there's a rider nearby and that their destination is a good distance from where they are. I like these ones. You get to enjoy the ride, maybe have some small talk, and get paid an alright amount to do so. So, I accepted the rider and I headed over to the house where I saw that he was standing outside. I rolled down the window and told him that I was John, his driver. He nodded and then got in the back seat, buckled in, and just stared at the back of the seat that was in front of him. At first I thought that he looked tired, and that would make sense, since it was late afternoon and I was a bit drained myself. I started on my small talk routine, basically just asking about random things like how the day was going. But when I asked him how his day was, he seemed to flinch a bit and told me that he wasn't having the best day. I apologized and asked if he wanted to vent anything, basically saying that the therapy sessions were a free perk of using Uber. You'd be surprised of how many people open up when they think about the fact that you'll likely never see them again. And he just shook his head and told me that he didn't want to talk about it. So I moved on to my last attempt, which was basically just mentioning any small detail to get him thinking. He was heading to another house on the other side of town, over in a neighborhood that I personally knew, so I said as much. "So, you're going over," and I mentioned the road name. "I know that area. I used to have a friend that lived over there. It's a really nice part of town. She used to take her dog over to the dog park because they didn't require a leash." And after I finished my statement, he just nodded and kept staring out into space. It was then that I noticed that he was clenching his jaw really hard, that his eyes looked bloodshot, and that he just seemed out of it. We pulled up to a stop sign and I stopped, then glanced back at my passenger. "I just need to check and make sure that you're okay to be out here. You look like you're in pain or something is seriously wrong." I know, this may sound incredibly annoying, but I'm not going to be that driver that lets some injured person get out of my car and die because I didn't speak up. "If you need to go to the hospital, I can take you there, and we get the charge for the ride canceled. I just want to make sure that you're okay." He didn't even look up at me. He just started shaking like he had the chills and stared off into space. Hey, man, I won't report you or get you into trouble. I just need to make sure you're okay and that you're not on some sort of substance for my safety right now. I'm willing to help you any way you need me to. When I said this, he finally glanced over to me and actually looked me in the eyes. He said he was fine, just that he was stressed and had a bad day, and that he needed to get home. In the end, I had to accept this answer, and I couldn't force him to go to the hospital, but I was still concerned. I told him that if he changed his mind at any point during the ride, I would take him to get help at no charge. He said thank you, and I pulled back onto the road and kept going. The ride was silent for quite a while, and I think we were about 3/4 of the way to the destination, when he asked me to stop, and I did. I pulled over when I could and asked if he wanted me to take him to the hospital now. Then he surprised me and said, "No, I need you to take me to the police station." At this point, I was starting to wonder if this poor kid was the victim of a crime or if something happened at his original place. I asked if we needed to call 911 or if he just wanted me to drive him there, and he said to drive. I canceled the trip and made a mental note to call support and explain the situation to them after the fact. Then opened maps to get to the closest station. When I got back onto the road, I told him, "I went ahead and canceled the ride. You'll get a refund for it. I'll contact support and let them know that this was on me, so they don't think you did anything wrong." He then replied with, "I killed my mother." Obviously, this caught me off guard. I assume I misheard him and I said, "I'm sorry?" "I murdered my mother. I strangled her because she pissed me off. She made me so mad that I murdered her. I want to turn myself in." And as he said this, I could see his tears start to well up, and my heart was seriously racing. I nodded and I told him that we were on the way to the station and that he was doing the right thing. Clearly, he wasn't stable at this point in time, and I didn't want to antagonize him or make him second-guess talking to the cops. And as you can imagine, the entire time we were driving to the station after that, I was watching him in the mirror. I pulled up as close to the door of the station as I could, and he said thank you and got out, then walked to the door and went in. I pulled into one of the spots and just kind of sat there. And after a few moments, one of the officers came out to talk to me, which I partially expected. They asked me if I knew the kid. I told them that I literally picked him up as an Uber and that I was just taking him to another house. But then he told me that he wanted me to drive him here and that he murdered his mother. I told them that I had no idea who he was. I gave them the address of where I picked him up and where he was going. I showed them in the app all the proof I could that I was just an Uber driver and not an accomplice or anything. And my worry was that they were not going to believe me and charge me as aiding a murderer. But they let me go when they were satisfied. You bet your ass I called support and spoke with them about this whole thing. I don't know what I expected them to do, but I felt like I needed to tell them about it, just in case the police contacted them. And in the end, I have no idea what happened to the kid. I have no idea if he was telling the truth, and I have no clue what went on after I left the station. And honestly, I kind of prefer it that way. Like a lot of other people in this country, I have to depend on Uber and Lyft and other ride services to get from point A to point B, anytime that I don't have someone that I can ride with. While most others out there use the services because they're convenient and also easier than calling a taxi, I use them because I actually have to, and I have no choice. I was unfortunately diagnosed with a very serious epilepsy, and as such, I am actually restricted from ever getting my license. Something about being a high risk and possibly having a seizure while driving. Apparently, the state looks down on people that may hurt themselves or someone else because they start seizing on the highway. As such, using these services has been a godsend, and I don't have to just sit at home and wait for my boyfriend to come home or to go anywhere, or have to call my parents and ask if they have time to come and get me just so I can go to the store and get some avocados for dinner. They have seriously changed my life, and I am beyond grateful for them. That said, not all of my rides have been perfect. Most of the time, I put it in the app, I get the people that show up at my door, and I get in the car. Most of the time there aren't any issues, and most of the time, it's just a matter of making sure that I have enough money to pay them. I will seriously say that most of the drivers I've dealt with have been nothing short of amazing. They're fast, dependable, and I'll sometimes explain to them that I do have a medical issue that makes me unable to drive. Usually when they hear that, they loosen up a little. They realize that I'm not just some girl that doesn't want to drive myself. Now, all my praise for this wonderful service is one thing. But like I said, it's not always perfect. Sometimes, you get drivers that are straight up rude or just not talkative. I can usually deal with the ones that don't want to talk. It's whatever in the end. They're there to do a job and nothing more, and that's really fine with me. But when they get rude for no reason, that I do have an issue with, and I'll rate them low and pretty much just move on. Well, that is, all except this one driver that this story is about. This happened probably about a year or so ago. I think it was late 2019, because it was definitely before we all had to spend a year inside, but not by much. It was one of those days where my boyfriend was at work and I didn't want to bother my sister, and I needed to go to the store for various things. For the most part, just like any other day. I loaded up my app and I put in for a ride. I marked the local supermarket and it said that my driver Manny was on the way. Great, no problem. Everything was working as it was supposed to. Then, Manny pulled up in a not very well taken care of sedan. And I'm not one to judge people, honestly. I know that some people cannot afford a new car, and he may have been doing this to make ends meet for whatever reason. But this car was looking like it was coming close to the end of its life. The paint was peeling, and the rear passenger side tire was low. There was more, but in the end, I just said whatever and got in. I needed to get to my store, and it was only about a 10-minute drive at most. And I could just call for a new driver when I needed to go back home. In the end, if the car got me to where I needed to go, then I was happy. As soon as I got in, I noticed that this guy was just staring at me, like intently staring at me. I tried to smile at him in an attempt to maybe, break the tension or something, but he just kept his face focused and eyes wide open. After I got situated in the back seat, I looked back up and sure enough, he was still staring at me. It was like at this point that I realized this guy looked like he hadn't slept in a couple months. His eyes were sunken, the skin around them were bluish, and his face looked dry and tight. Again, not one to judge, but he was clearly either not well or on something. But again, me being the self-contained and fairly small woman I am, I just kind of nodded and asked if he knew the best route to the store. His response was, "The phone will tell me where to go." And then he slowly shifted his gaze forward. He starts pulling forward back onto the road, slowly, and he glances back at me again and asks me my name. I gave a slight smile and told him my name was Ashley. It didn't click until after the ride that the app told him my name, and he should have known it. He nodded slowly and started to make that weird noise people make when they suck on their teeth, followed by a bit of a low grumbling noise. I reflexively asked him if he was okay, and he seriously said, "No." It was around this time that I was certain that I was about to die. This whole trip, the whole 4 minutes and less than a half a mile of it, were honestly enough to make my stomach turn and my skin crawl. I grabbed my bag and put my hand in it, grabbing my mace and just holding on to it. He turns onto one of the main roads, making the turn as slow as he possibly could, and then he looks back again and says, "Are you religious, Ashley?" I sheepishly replied, "Not particularly." And he laughed at my response, then slightly shook his head. "You should be." He nodded as he started talking again. "You should be, Ashley. You should be. You need to be." I think I just replied with, "Okay." And he glared in the mirror again and started back up. "No, it's not okay. You don't know what's coming." His tone was seriously freaky at this point. He added, "Big things are going to happen, and you need to repent, Ashley. You need to beg for forgiveness, and you need to repent for everything you've done in this life, and every past life that got you to this point." Mind you, at this point, he was already driving around 20 in a 35 and repeatedly glancing back up in a mirror at me. "Ashley, tell me that you're sorry for what you've done. Repent to me, Ashley." I'm sorry for everything I've done." I just kind of felt like if I did what he asked, I might make it through the ride. "Good. That's good, Ashley. Now that you've started to repent, you can beg for forgiveness when it matters." It was at this point that he pulled his car over toward the sidewalk and looked back at me again. I started to reach for the door handle, but he shouted to stop and I jumped when he did. I could feel myself starting to hyperventilate and I was in a state of panic. He then said that we needed to say a prayer and that he would let me go on with my day after that. And once again, I nodded and looked down, waiting for him to say what he needed to say. "To our dear Father, I beg of you, forgive Ashley, for she knows not of what is to come. Her soul is clean, she means well, and she deserves the love of you and all those that watch over us. I beg of you, Father, accept Ashley's request for forgiveness. Allow her to ascend when you return. I beg for you, Father, accept Ashley's love into your heart as she has started to accept your love into hers. She has been reached. She has begun her first steps down the path to your paradise. And I beg of you, Father, please show her the way. Amen." By this point, I was starting to cry and I felt like I was going to pass out. I said amen and thank you to him. And yes, I seriously thanked him at that moment because I had no idea what was going to happen. Surprisingly, the answer is nothing. He hit the unlock button and told me that I could go. I opened the button and he told me to have a blessed day and then drove off. This whole ordeal was around 10 minutes and he hadn't taken me more than a couple blocks down the way. My only thoughts were, how the hell did I not get murdered just then? And also, what the hell just happened? Obviously, I contacted Uber support to report this, but I have no idea what ended up happening. They didn't inform me that they were going to take action against him, and I'm pretty sure he rated me as a 5-star passenger. The only thing that I ended up with was a refund of the trip because he was unable to get me to my destination. I have no idea what happened to Manny, the apocalyptic preacher, for whoever the hell his father was, but I hope to never ever run into him again. I was coming home from taking a train for a work trip, and it was 11. The train station where I lived at that time was outside and had no security whatsoever, so granted, I was already a little bit on edge. And after waiting 20 minutes for an Uber all alone, I was relieved to see my Uber driver. He had an accent and was from a Middle Eastern country, and the first thing he asked was if I was too. But I often get mistaken for being different nationalities, so it felt normal. I politely said no, and at first everything was normal, and we made small talk since the drive was long. But then he started making odd comments saying that I was beautiful, asking if I had an American boyfriend, and if my parents wanted me married. I dodged his questions, but then as we were 5 minutes away from my apartment, he asked if I was doing anything that night, and I said no and that I didn't plan on it. He then asked if I lived alone. I do, but I was getting scared, so I said that I had 3 roommates and they were expecting me, and that seemed to make him stop, and he remained silent the whole ride. I then got notified that I had a package, and unfortunately my apartment would charge if you didn't retrieve the packages after a certain time frame. So, as soon as we reached my apartment, I get out and use my keycard to go to the package room, which was in a separate room from my apartment entrance. I look outside, and he's still parked out front looking around. The way the apartment works is that you have to go outside to go to the actual entrances. One entrance has stairs and the other with the elevator, and that was in the parking garage. I take a deep breath, holding my package, and start to run, and he gets out and starts to run chasing me. Using my keycard, I make it to the stairs entrance and slam the door and run up the stairs. I get into my room and I look out my window, and I saw him still outside in his car. Being on the 3rd floor, my lights were on and he looked right at my window, and he stayed parked the whole night and then eventually drove off. I reported him on Uber and was extremely cautious for the whole week, but I still don't know what he was planning to do, and I'm grateful that my parents made me do running as a kid. So, creepy Uber driver, let's never meet again. I worked as a flight attendant for a few years when I decided to take an extended sabbatical from college. There were a handful of let's not meet situations I encountered, but one in particular still makes my skin crawl more than any other. I was born and raised in Texas, but I had moved to New York when I was 21. So when I found out at the beginning of a week-long trip that I'd have a couple of overnights in Austin, I was super excited to go to my home state, even just for a few days. My brother lived just north of the city, and we planned to hang out and go to dinner the night that I arrived when he got off of work. And then the following day, we were going to meet up with our dad, who lived about an hour away. So, I get to the hotel downtown, the crew and I check in, and then we each head off to our rooms. Short elevator ride and I get to mine. But we're not even 5 minutes later. There's a loud, hard knock on the door. It was only around 1 or 2 p.m., and I hadn't called either my dad or brother to let them know that I was in town yet, so they wouldn't know what room I was in. So I assumed it was maybe one of my crewmates, so I headed to the door. And before even making it to the door, a loud male voice on the other side boomed. He said, "The front desk sent me about the bathroom problem you called in." And before trying to open the door, he said again, "Unlock the door and open up, miss. I need in, now." I froze in my tracks. I hadn't even been in the bathroom yet, let alone called anything to the front desk. I'm a petite chick, and while I take no shit from anyone despite my size, I still err on the side of caution. Slowly inching toward the door to look out the peephole, all I could tell was that the man on the other side was at least 6 foot tall and easily over double my weight. There was no way in hell that I was going to unlock the door. I responded to the guy, telling him that he must have had the wrong room. He continued pounding on the door while constantly turning the handle, telling me no and that he needed in and he was getting in the room one way or another. So I panicked, but thankfully I had the sense to grab the phone and call the front desk. The concierge confirmed that they had neither sent anyone up to my room nor had they received a call about the bathroom. The entire time, this freaking guy was still determined to get into my room, pounding and yelling. Luckily for me, the front desk has dispatched security to my room. When the security officers step off the elevator a few seconds later, I can hear them in the hall approach and ask the guy who he was and what he was doing, and telling him that he needed to leave the hotel. He immediately gets hostile and aggressive toward them, and the front desk clerk that I'm still on the phone with tells me that the police have been called and are on their way. In the meantime, I'm trapped in my room and I'm scared shitless. Long story short, the cops show up pretty quickly and manage to arrest the guy for trespassing and criminal menacing or some shit. I later found out that the guy was also wanted in connection to a string of break-ins and violent sexual assaults in Austin. He had seen and stalked me from the minute that I entered the hotel lobby, and apparently, I was exactly his type of victim. Nothing else ever happened after that, but it still rattled the hell out of me for the rest of my stay in that hotel. I'm female, 31, and stays away from home on a business trip. About an hour ago at around 8:30 p.m. here, I had just gotten back to my room from a work dinner. I heard shuffling in the hallway and I peeked out of the peephole. I saw a figure seemingly outside the room to the left of mine. They were knocking lightly and said twice quickly, "Hello? Hello?" Then, it sounded like the door opened and closed. I was like, okay, they must have forgotten what room they were in or something, and someone let them in. I walk back to the main part of my room, and I hear the shuffling again. I look out again and see a figure. I can't really make out what the person looks like, but I see them on the other side of my room this time. Again, I hear a light knocking and hello? Hello? Now, I'm starting to get a weird spidey sense of like, what the hell is going on? I see the figure leave and I think, okay, that was really weird. But then again I start hearing the shuffling. I start walking toward the hotel room door and I hear a light knock on what sounds to be my door again. And I hear, "Hello? Hello?" And immediately, after someone attempts to open my door. Thank God that I had the cross latch pulled over. My heart stopped as I stood there and I watched the door hit the latch and fall back shut. I called the front desk and informed them that someone had just tried entering my room and I'm not staying with anyone. The front desk attendant just replied, "I don't have any housekeeping up there." To which I replied, Okay. Well, that's concerning. Can you please send someone up to check around?" Then the attendant replied, "Well, there's no manager on duty." To which I asked if I should just call the police instead because I was very worried and I was starting to cry a bit. And she just replied that I should do what I thought I needed to do. I hung up and cried for a bit, not really sure what to do, and I didn't want to ask for another room because I'm too scared to leave now. 10 minutes later, the hotel phone starts ringing, and I was honestly feeling really scared to answer, but I did. It was from the front desk attendant, and she said the police were going to be coming to my room and she didn't want me to panic when I heard someone knock on my door. I said okay and I hung up. I sat there and thought, how do I know this is real? Whoever tried to access my room had a key. Otherwise, how else would the door have actually opened? A few minutes later, as expected, I hear a knock, and I look out the peephole and saw 2 male officers. I didn't ask to see their ID, which in hindsight, it probably would have been the smart thing to do, but I was so shaken up and not really thinking. I opened the door and they asked what was going on, and I told them all that I explained above. They said that it was good that I had the cross latch pulled over, because the door would open if not. I responded, "It's a hotel, what do you mean? What's the point of the access card then?" They then took a pause and they were like, "Oh, it automatically locks?" Again, I'm like, yeah, it's a hotel." So then they had me shut the door and open it with a key to test it. And sure enough, it didn't open without the access card. Then they said it was probably housekeeping. I responded that the front desk attendant told me that there was no housekeeping up there when I called, plus it was 8:30 p.m. Why would housekeeping be coming by at that time unless I had requested someone to come by? Plus, I noticed housekeeping had already been there during the day because my trash was emptied out and my dirty towel was gone. They ultimately told me that they thought it was housekeeping and not to worry, but if anything else happened or I felt unsafe, just to call them again. They also said that if I wanted to change rooms, they were sure the hotel would accommodate this. I said okay while crying, and they left. Now, I'm sitting in my room crying, laying under the covers in my clothes. I'm sure I won't sleep tonight, and I'm also too afraid to change rooms because I don't want to leave this room. I have the cross latch pulled over and the deadbolt lock. I think I'm safe. Am I just being paranoid? Was it probably housekeeping? Should I be doing something different?
A couple of years ago, I was driving myself back to my little hometown in Idaho. My sister was going to be having her first kid, and it was going to be my first niece, so I wanted to be there for her. It was going to be about a 10-hour drive, and I was planning on leaving the following Friday morning since I was off and had the whole day to get there. Unfortunately, I had a maintenance thing come up at my apartment that I had to be there for, and of course, when you're given a time frame of 4 hours, they will show up in those last 30 minutes, then take another 2 hours to complete it. Because of this, I ended up leaving around 6 or 7 that night. I was pissed, but decided I would still head out that night. That way I could get there early, crash for a few hours, and be good to go. So I got my stuff in my car and headed out. Because I had planned this in advance, I already had a couple bottles of water, energy drinks, and snacks ready to go. It was about mid-October, so the weather was great to just have the windows cracked, music blaring, and enjoying the ride. The view was pretty nice too, and there wasn't too much traffic at that time, so I was in a good state of mind. Unfortunately, I started crashing around 1 or 2 a.m. I didn't want to stop because I knew I only had a few hours left, but it was a struggle. I had finished off my energy drinks, rolled the windows down more, hoping the chillier air would keep me awake, but nothing was working. I know how dangerous it can be driving when you're tired and on the highway on top of that, so I decided to stop at a hotel to sleep for the night. I drive a tiny 2-door coupe, so it's not exactly comfortable to lean the seat back and sleep. Otherwise, I would have just done that. I look for the hotel signs and get off the exit for the first one I see. It was a little old looking from the outside. I don't remember the name of it as it wasn't one of the bigger chains either. I just thought as long as the door locked and it wasn't too badly priced, I'll stay. I didn't need anything other than a bed. I got out, grabbed my bag, and headed in. The lobby was a bit eerie. It was dimly lit with a single couch and table area, and the desk had what appeared to be bulletproof glass around it. It also smelled musty, like it hadn't been used in years. Even the carpet looked ancient with its dark red theater-looking pattern. As I approached the desk and saw that it was empty, I noticed the door behind the desk that was slightly open, and I heard faint talking, like it was coming from a TV. There was no bell or any way to get someone's attention, so I just said, "Hello?" and waited. I heard the talking get quieter and someone coming out of the room. It was a frail older guy wearing what I think was something like long johns in a robe. He wasn't rude or anything, but he also wasn't very polite. But maybe that's because I was there at 2 a.m. and I was interrupting his show. He said good morning, asked how long I was staying, gave me my room key, and told me the quiet hours and that no smoking was allowed. I thanked him and walked off down the hallway. I got to my room, which made me realize I definitely got what I wanted. It looked just as old in the rooms as it did in the lobby. Same red carpet, mustard yellow curtains and bedding, and the same musty smell. The air just felt still in there, so I quickly turned on the AC to get the air flowing. I sat my bag and purse down in the chair and went to the bathroom first. While I was in there, something just felt off. It was like that sense you get when you're being watched. I figured it was just me being on edge because I was tired and in a place I wasn't familiar with. So I splashed water on my face, changed into my pajamas, and got into bed. As I was laying there though, that feeling would not go away. I tried just falling asleep and ignoring it, but unlike in the car, I now was unable to. That's when I started hearing things. I couldn't really tell at first what it was, but it was really quiet, like it was either a muffled TV or someone whispering. Trying to be reasonable, I was thinking it was just someone with the TV on too loud in the next room, so I tried ignoring it. I think because of the situation though, I started getting annoyed and actually smacked the wall a few times, hoping they'd get the hint. It appeared they did as it got quiet, so I tried to focus on sleeping again. Not long after, I started hearing more noises, but this made me jump as it actually sounded like someone whispering in my room. I quickly turned on the light and looked around and didn't see anything. Now that I'm spooked, I turned on the TV to have some of my own sound to try and help. Unfortunately, the whispering kept up. It wasn't constant, but I could hear it, and it all just sounded mumbled. I could never make out anything. Until the end, when it sounded like it was right behind me and it said, "It hurts," and it made me jump again. I looked behind me towards the door and I just saw a dark figure. It looked like a child or maybe a young woman. I quickly turned on the light and it was gone. Now, I know I turned on the air, but it was just the fan, so the air was moving, but it was freezing in that room. I went and looked at the unit thinking maybe I did turn on the AC, but it was still on fan. I turned it off since it had gotten so cold in there, and then I turned on all of the lights, turned the TV louder, and tried to forget about it all. It wasn't much longer when I started feeling something at the edge of my bed. I again tried to rationalize that it was something like the comforter moving or falling until it started feeling more like someone grabbing my foot. That was it for me. I grabbed my stuff, ran out of that room in my pajamas still, and noticed the room that I thought the TV sounds were coming from was actually just a janitor's closet or supply room. I walked past the front desk, and the room in the back was now dark, but I kept going. I tossed my stuff in my passenger seat as I got in and locked my doors. If I would have known that that was going to happen, I would have just tried to sleep in my car. I couldn't shake the weird feeling just being in the parking lot, so I left. I didn't even care about the money. I didn't feel right trying to explain I wanted a refund because I saw a ghost, so I just ate it. I drove further down to a 24-hour McDonald's and slept in my car for a few hours. I used the restroom to change into clothes, grabbed a large coffee, and headed back out. When I got to my sister's, I told her all about it, and she believed it. She's very into the paranormal, so she enjoyed the story, but me, not so much. I wanted to look into the history of that hotel, but I couldn't remember the name of it. One of the times I go over there again, I have to try and find it for her, but it will be during the day, and I promise you, I will not be staying there.
Hi, my name is Taz. I'm not a native English speaker, so if anything's a little off, it's because Google Translate has failed me. A trigger warning: if you are uncomfortable with any mentions of nudity, then please stop listening. Your mental, emotional, and physical health comes first. Do you know those silly school trips that last a few days? I used to go on as many of those as I could. I love them. It was always fun to choose your roommates and decide who went on what bed and etc. And I would have been about 12 or 13 at the time of this story, and everyone else involved being around the same age. This school trip was meant to be like any other. It was for my English class, and it was about a certain author that we were studying. The day started ordinary. We got off of the coach and we went up to our designated rooms, and in our room was a shower and a toilet and 4 bunk beds. One was closer to the door and the second was parallel to it on the opposite side of the room. I was on the bottom bunk, my friend Rosa was on the bunk on top of me, and my other friends, Eloise and Noelle, were on the other bunk. Eloise was on the bottom and Noelle was on the top. To get into our room, you had to go up 2 flights of stairs and into a little foyer area. From there, you had a door directly to the left of the foyer entrance door. Go through that door and there were 2 more doors, one to the left and one straight forward, and the one directly in front was ours. It's important to note that some friends of ours were in the room to the left. We were allowed to go out in small groups in the village or town area, as long as we told the teacher. I remember my room and the next room to us went out to grab some snacks and food, as we would not be having food until the next morning. Our room was bigger, and we all went in there to enjoy our masterful feast. It must have been around 6 p.m. Maybe a little later. Our school was very friendly and everyone knew pretty much everyone, so we would have a set time that we would all go down and talk, socialize, play snooker, watch The Love Island, or just generally chill out. And our teachers would join in as well. It was a lot of fun. We would usually go up to our rooms at around 10 to 11 p.m. and that night, we went up at 10. My roommates and I stayed up for a while, talking and sharing sweets around. The rooms next door didn't have a toilet and they were worried about what they could do. So we decided that instead of being smart and just giving them our room key and taking it back in the morning, that we would just keep the door unlocked for them. I'm pretty sure that I fell asleep at around midnight after everyone else had fallen asleep. And I woke up a short while later, completely knackered and half asleep. I'm a light sleeper, so when I heard the door click shut, I immediately woke up. I assumed that it was one of the girls next door coming in to use the toilet, but it wasn't. I heard low grunting, panting, I'm not sure, which confused my still asleep brain to no end, but I concluded that it was one of the male teachers who just forgot to check up on everyone. It's not that uncommon. What I didn't expect was the dude to come over and sit down on the edge of my bed, as if he was getting ready to get in. He sat on my foot, and I guess he felt it because he stood back up and put his hands on the end bars of the ladders on both of the bunks and assumed trying to stay standing up. For some reason, I still thought it was a teacher, but I was starting to wake up a little at this point, starting to take in the situation. I heard him say, "Wait, this is not my room. It's a room with girls in it." And I just replied, "Yes, it is." It was weird. It wasn't a question and he didn't sound confused or embarrassed. He stated that he was in a room full of young girls and he knew where he was. I'm pretty sure he purposely looked for a girl's room. He also didn't speak like a normal human being. Looking back, why on earth was I not freaking out? I have no idea. Note that this is the first night. A lot of crazy things happen on that trip, some of which will haunt me forever. Always lock your doors no matter what. Be smart, be safe, and remember, if something happens to you, it's never your fault, and you're not alone. Anyway, I heard slight shuffling and the door clicked shut again. And that's when it clicked for me. There was an unknown man in our room, and I talked to him. I bolted up into a sitting position and quietly slipped out of the bed, grabbing our room key off of the coat hook that we put it on. Then, I saw legs. I would have screamed if I wasn't so stunned, scared, and tired. I scrambled back into my bed, and that's when Rosa woke up. She was incredibly tired and I was on the verge of a panic attack. I got up off of my bed so she could see, and I just pointed at the legs when she saw them and she went wide-eyed and looked like she would join me in my panicking. We started whispering, trying to figure out what to do. Then Noelle woke up, asking us to be quiet as she was trying to sleep. So Rosa broke the news that we probably wouldn't be sleeping properly at all that night. Noelle didn't believe us at first, so I tiptoed over to her and showed her the legs. Then it hit both of us. He was naked. There was a naked man in our room, unconscious for all we know, just in front of the door, blocking out the only escape route from the room. And so far it wasn't looking too great. I went over to Eloise and shook her awake. She scared us half to death with how loud she sounded, and we were terrified that this man had come into our room with bad intentions and was either pretending to be unconscious so that we would go near him, or that he had somehow managed to knock himself out. But if we went near him, he might awaken. I got Eloise to calm down, and Rosa once again explained as I started to break down. The other girls closed behind me in my distress. We got out our phones and started calling every friend contact that was on the trip with us, desperately hoping that they would wake up and that they could come and save us. But sometimes, you have to be your own hero. We were trying to stay calm and figure out a plan when Noelle was able to reach her dad on the phone, and he gave us some advice about how to handle the situation, but ultimately told us to get out and find someone to help us. Remember that the man was in the entryway, blocking the door with his head. It felt like we were trapped, but we decided to just do it. If it went wrong, we would just hit him on the head with the door. Simple. Noelle went first, followed by Eloise, then me, and then Rosa. The door was only open a crack, so we had to move quickly and quietly, trying to fit through the crack as best as we could. Otherwise, we ran the risk of hitting him and waking him up. I'm fairly certain Rosa hit him on the head just to spite him, and I wish I had the confidence to do that. We went through both of the doors and out into the open space area, and at the left end of the area was one of the male teacher's rooms. I remember frantically knocking on the door, still being careful to not wake the man or anyone else up, but no teacher ever answered. So we kinda just stood there in the middle of the open area, freaking out and crying ourselves a river. And looking back, I feel kinda stupid, but I can't change the past. Then all of the teachers on the trip came out of the corridor, talking quietly, obviously seeing us sobbing, and seeing me and Noelle collapse on the floor in a breakdown was not what they had expected to see that night. Apparently, the man had been walking around most of the rooms trying the door handles, knocking on the doors and just trying to get in. My male teachers had caught him and taken him downstairs, and at that point, he had a bedrobe on. The teachers had gone to one of the rooms to figure out what they should do, and since we were underage and part of a school, they had to call the police. We had to stay up and wait for the police to arrive, and we had to go to a separate area where the female teacher's room was and calm down over there. When the police arrived, they took the man downstairs and we were asked some questions, and we asked questions in return. The police told us that the man wasn't drunk, nor on drugs, and he had no reason to be there, and they had no idea what his intentions were and what he was doing that night. He was kicked out of the hotel and is never allowed back there. But nevertheless, it was quite creepy, and I wish to never see him again. Back in the 90s, I used to work at a cemetery. I helped with the dirty work of digging the graves, lowering caskets, and helping with the upkeep of the fields. It was an easy enough job, and we hardly dealt with the customers, so we were pretty much left to ourselves as long as we got the job done and did it respectfully. I also typically only worked during the day, which I was fine, because some of the things that I witnessed were weird and creepy enough that I didn't need to know what happened at night. So, as mentioned, there were definitely some unforgettable events. We've had some edgy teens break in and run around the plots, we had a naked guy sleeping on a grave once, and someone even brought a gun, demanding we let him in after we had closed. So, it's not uncommon, but you still remember them. But there was one that messed me up for a very long time and actually led to me quitting. While we were working out on the grounds, we may occasionally see customers come and go, setting up services, making payments, and etc. We get all the work done on the plots the night before, so that way we didn't have a huge hole open during business hours. We had a truck that also came and always parked on one side of the cemetery that delivered flowers and other lawn supplies. And right as the truck was pulling in, there was a car that sped into the lot, cutting off the truck and stopped right where the truck usually parked. It made no sense. There was a whole parking lot and they chose to stop there. I started walking up to the fence to ask the person to move their car, but also expecting pushback just by the way they drove in. A woman frantically got out of the car in sweatpants and a hoodie and also a messy bun, and she was looking around. I kindly asked her if she could park in one of the actual spots, as that side was for the truck, not to mention a no parking zone technically. She immediately started yelling at me about how dare I ask something so inconsiderate and, "Do you know why I'm here? I just lost my father," and so on. I immediately shuddered because I knew this was going to be brought up to the people inside, and I couldn't really say anything to her because of the situation. So I just apologized, and I walked away as she continued yelling. Someone did come out a little later and asked me what happened, and I explained it all to them. Surprisingly, they understood and agreed that while it was common for people to come in still distraught, she was a little overboard. They said every time they would ask a question about what they wanted in the services, like the burial or cremation, visitation, type of flowers, and etc., she would burst into tears. They would try to calm her down and she'd be fine answering, until they asked another question. They said the whole process was exhausting, which told me a lot because this person never complained about their job. I let it go and then moved on, thinking that I'd probably not see this person again. A few days later, we were digging the plots as normal, and then we cleaned up the edges. We made sure the grass looked nice along the edges and things like that, when, lucky me, that woman shows up, walking towards me. I hold my breath expecting her to go off on me, but I kept my cool and greet her. She approached me smiling and asked if there was a plot number whichever. I pulled up my sheet to confirm, and she told me that this was her father's. She then apologized for her reaction the other day and explained that it just had been hard for her since she took care of her dad, and he was the only one that supported her too. I was polite because, just as expected, she was just going through the stages of loss and everyone grieves differently. I told her that it was okay and gave her my condolences. She said that she just wished that it was her instead because more people cared about her dad than her. Not knowing a damn thing about this woman, I tried to say that it wasn't true, and being in this field of work, no pun intended, you may not think many people care about you, but the services always say otherwise, and that she had to continue on for her dad. I don't know if what I said helped her or not, but she cried a little bit. She hugged me and thanked me and started walking away. Right before, though, she turned and asked me what time the cemetery closed, so I gave her the hours. I went home and told my wife about the woman, and she said that I did a good thing. She actually told me on the first encounter that she was probably going through a lot and not to judge someone based on that encounter. I suppose she was right, because that was definitely a different person that I met that day. So not only do we dig graves, but we also help lower the caskets and bury them. So the next day was going to be the services for her father. I got up like I do every morning. I get ready for work, kissed my wife goodbye, and I headed out for the day. I like getting there early to do the weed whacking, so that way it's out of the way and there's no chance of disturbing any visitors. The owner is usually already there getting things in order on days of services, so I walked into the office and talked with him for a few minutes before. I was one of the manager-like people at that time, so I had keys to the cemetery as well. The owner asked me if I had seen his keys because they usually left the keys to the cemetery gate in his office, but they weren't there. I said I hadn't and double-checked that I just had mine. They said that they probably just left it somewhere, as he had done that in the past, and then excused me to get to work. I went to the shed to grab the weed whacker, and then I headed out. And as I was walking around and getting closer to the plot that we had just dug the other day, I noticed the grass looking disturbed, like something was placed in it because it was flattened. I got angry at first, thinking it was another kid screwing around, and this woman was going through enough. I didn't want something else to happen, so I started walking up to it to see what had happened. Well, I wish it was just some kids. But I found the woman laying in the grave in a black dress and blood all over her wrist. Not knowing what to do, I immediately started yelling for the owner, and I jumped in the hole. The ground was damp from blood, and she was already pale, cold, and unresponsive. Thankfully, Henry heard me and came out and called 911 and then brought me a ladder to get us out. When the paramedics arrived, I heard them say that she had already lost a lot of blood, but that she would be okay, and then they were gone. I actually took the rest of the day off. I called my parents and my 2 sisters to let them know that I love them. That really hit me hard. This woman really didn't feel like she was worth it or that it was worth it to stay around, and felt this way was the only option that she had. No one should feel that alone. If it wasn't for her shallow groan, I would have thought that she was dead. But knowing she was close enough to that scared me enough. If I didn't come earlier, who knows how long it would have been before she was found. Thankfully, she did live though. We learned that she broke in through a back room window and then stole Henry's keys. I'm also thankful that he didn't press charges on her, but I heard the funeral for her father was a little off. I had to quit shortly after this. The first time I really talked to any of the customers, got to know them even that little bit, and then having to save their life was really too much for me. I found out what hospital she was at, and my wife and I thought that it was a good idea to send her flowers and a gift. I hope my words did something for her, something to keep her going, because it seemed like she just needed someone to support her again, or let her know that she wasn't alone. If you take anything from this, just let it be to be kind to people, because you never know what they're going through. I used to do part-time work for my dad at a cemetery at about 15 years ago. He helped maintain the grounds by keeping the lawn mowed, flowers watered, and picked up left-behind trash. After they had a service or around major holidays, he asked me to help out, as more people meant more trash and things to pick up. Not to be disrespectful, but some of the stuff people left behind, stuff that couldn't stay, like open food and drinks, or just their trash tissues, wrappers, and things like that. And those people prefer coming back to see that their loved one's resting place is being respected, so that's where we come in. It's typically the same thing each time. I'd walk around, pick up, adjust, look at the headstones, occasionally explain to someone where or how to find specific plots. I also typically work during the day, so I didn't run into any creepy or paranormal experiences, which made the job even easier. Now, this one time though, I had to help my dad zone an area out for a family of 3, a husband and wife and their child, that were going to be buried. We had the area already, but it was further in the back, which was usually used by people of higher class, local celebrities, and I suppose things like that, so that families can have more privacy. At that time, I didn't pay too much attention to the news, but I did remember hearing how a family had been killed in their home in an apparent robbery. From the small things I could pick up from my dad, this was the same family. So we had to get it all plotted out, make sure the trees were trimmed, the surrounding area cleared for the services, and etc. It was really an all-day thing. Now on the days of service, there's no work being done on the grounds. My dad was usually in the back fixing things inside, doing paperwork, making calls, and etc. And I ended up going up there to get my check and to just talk with my dad, but I didn't realize that the services were that day until I saw a full lot of vehicles. So I entered in the back to not interrupt anything. I talked with my dad for a while, but he seemed like his mind was elsewhere. Like he seemed distracted, so I asked him about it. He said that the funeral almost seemed like something out of a movie because they had a few cars that were far behind the rest of the group, and one man that got out of the vehicle had several other men surrounding him, like bodyguards. I didn't quite understand the concern over it and just tried to reason with them that they were probably important people. And if it's true what happened to the family, maybe it was police protection for the rest of them. He still seemed to be keeping an eye on them, but loosened up a bit. I ended up leaving a bit after to enjoy having the weekend off and a fresh paycheck. Now around this time, my mother had recently had surgery on her knee, so she needed a lot of help getting around. My sister worked overnights and was still living at home at that time, so she helped my mom while my dad was at work, and he took care of her in the evenings. The day after the service, I was at my parents' for dinner, and while we were settling down after dinner, my dad was telling me how he had this weird feeling that something wasn't right. He said he couldn't explain it, but he just felt like something was wrong. We tried to go through the normal things, make sure the stove was off, the dog was inside, and nothing was missing. We even called my sister to make sure she was okay, which she was. Then my dad mentioned the cemetery, worried that he may have forgotten something there, like to close or lock the gates, the door to the crematorium, or something like that. And since he wasn't the owner, I could at least understand the concern because he would be responsible if anything happened. I offered to go check it out to make him feel better. They were both hesitant at first, but I finally convinced them that I would be fine. I didn't believe in any superstitions, and if all I had to do was to check some doors, then I would be fine. So I left with a promise to call them when I got there. I pulled up to the front and noticed an old beat-up car in the parking lot. The lot is usually empty, but we might occasionally get people parked there to sleep or just talking in their car or something. I got out and walked around the car, but as expected, there was no one in there and no one around. I figured the car just broke down as it looked like it hadn't moved in months as is. So I walked up to the building, I checked the door, which had been locked, and then I went inside. I called my dad from the phone in the funeral home, and I walked around to make sure that everything was turned off and locked. I seemed to have calmed his nerves some more, so after I hung up, I locked the front entrance and then I started to head out. As I was walking back though, I noticed the gates to the grounds were partially open. There was usually this chain-like lock that went around it so no one could get in. It was just dangling from the fence, so my thought was, my dad probably just forgot to lock it up, and that was probably the issue he was having. I went to secure it, and when I looked up into the fields, I had a weird feeling. Something was telling me to go check in there. I got annoyed with myself after convincing my dad that nothing was wrong, but something was really bugging me to check it out. So I skipped grabbing the golf cart and thought that I would do a quick walk through the grounds. Everything was looking fine until I kept walking towards the back. When I got there were 2 shovels sitting next to that family that was just buried, and even worse, they had been messed with. There was a pile of dirt on the side and they had knocked over one of the headstones. And as I went to turn around to go call someone, I was then knocked out cold. When I finally started to come back, I noticed that it was still dark and I was laying in the grass and my head was pounding. That's when I started hearing the familiar sounds of dirt being shoveled. I tried to turn around to check the sound when I felt something cold at the back of my head. I will never forget that sound. I just threw my hands up and stopped moving otherwise. I don't even remember what I said to them, but probably something pathetic and pleading. It felt like I was like this for hours though. I just remember there was at least 3 people, and they weren't speaking English, but I have no idea what language it was. And after a while, I was told to lie face down and count to 100. I know I didn't get far when I was knocked out again. This time when I woke up though, it was day, and I was not in the graveyard but in a hospital bed. Of course, my parents were there and they were freaking out and trying to explain what happened. When I wasn't back at their place after 20 minutes or so, my dad started getting worried. He went out himself to check but also called the cops to meet him there. When they arrived, they saw my car in the lot, me not in it, and one of the tires slashed. Then they found me. Those people had completely dug up the husband's grave and destroyed the coffin to obviously get something that he was buried with. But what? What could be so important that you have to dig up a grave for it? I know they never caught anyone because I had to make a statement and they kept me informed, and as far as I know, no one in the family knows who could have done it either. Or at least they aren't talking. This did push my dad to convince the owner to get security cameras, and since then, the worst they get is a raccoon or a person sleeping in the parking lot again. But I also won't go there alone at night anymore either. My dad's family has owned a funeral home and cemetery for many generations. The old office was so small that it is now used as a storage shed for our equipment, and a bigger and better office was built. It's a blessing in the sense that I will always have a job, but it's definitely not for everyone. I am not the type that gets scared or uncomfortable when it comes to death. In fact, being in this field has made me more responsible when it comes to end-of-life decisions. At 32, I can tell you that I already have my plans laid out, so there isn't a burden on my family if anything were to happen. I'm sure some of my friends think that I'm weird, but hey, life is short and you never know what will happen tomorrow. I also feel like I am more open-minded and in tune with those that have passed and the paranormal because of this. My mother has always helped out at the funeral home, but ghosts and spirits have never been her thing. Even dealing with death every day, she didn't believe any of it was real. I say this because I couldn't really talk to her about what I witnessed, but my father believed all of it. In fact, we joke about having some frequent ghosts in our facility or on the grounds and speak about them as if they were living customers right in front of us. I feel our place has become locally popular because of the paranormal activity alone. Because I am so connected to them, they really hold a place close to me like family, and I wanted to share a few that I will always remember. When I was younger, My parents still brought me to the funeral home so that they could watch me, but when there was a service going on, I was at my grandparents' or aunt and uncle's. I appreciate them wanting me to understand that this is a normal thing, but also didn't want me to see anything a child shouldn't. So, I often saw people coming and going to the funeral home, caskets and urns coming in, and sometimes other random items that families might request. One in particular that stood out to me when I was about 6 was a really gorgeous blue casket, but it was also very small. We all know what that means. As I saw my parents setting up the room, I noticed the decals they were putting on the casket, which were different superheroes. My mom had explained to me that it was for a little boy that really liked them, and his parents asked for his final resting place to look like his room. So they dressed it up just as they wanted, before they brought him out for the services, and before the family arrived to set up the rest, like personal gifts and pictures, and I was ushered off to my aunt's and things continued as normal. After a few days, I was back there, playing in the back room and watching a movie, when I noticed that my dolls were falling off the small desk that was in there. Thinking nothing of it, I just picked them up and put them back. This actually happened twice more, and at that age, I was just getting annoyed and yelled, "Stop it!" It didn't happen again after that, but my dad had walked in and asked what happened. I told him what was going on when he smiled and said, maybe we should ask nicely next time, and then he walked out, but left the door open that time. After a few minutes of getting back to my movie, I realized this, and I look over to the door. That's when I saw a young boy wearing a long blue cape just standing there. Not knowing what to do, I just said hi, but he continued to stand there. I tried talking to him more, but he would never respond. So, I got up and closed the door, with him standing there. And a while later, my mom came in and asked how I was doing, and that's when I brought up the little boy. She said there weren't any boys there, and asked what he looked like. And after describing him to her, the look on her face changed to one of concern, and she just left the room. As I got older, I learned that my mom thought my dad told me about the little boy that was in the blue casket, or that I saw him because that was exactly what he looked like, down to the cape. Over time, my dad and I both got used to seeing the little boy. He became a little bit mischievous, and at times, just like my dolls, things would get moved, things would go missing, only to reappear right where they last were, or things would get knocked down. I finally found out his name so I could address him properly, and from there, it was as if I could communicate with him. I would ask him, "Charlie, where did my pen go?" And it would be in my seat or something. However, unlike some of the others, he's the only kid that I've seen, and my dad and I are the only ones to see or experience his presence. The other experience occurred as a young adult. The cemetery is open all day for anyone to come and go as they please. Some people go by themselves, or with another person, or where I've seen a whole group of people practically trying to have a party or celebration for their loved ones. We usually let them be and give them their privacy until close, and when we're closing, we walk or drive around and let everyone know so that they can start heading out. After one particular service, there was a woman that stayed around long after the service was over. I knew it was the same woman because of her outfit. She was in a long black dress that was flowy towards the bottom because you could see the bottom of it move with the wind. It looked like it had either lace sleeves with attached gloves or full-length gloves. She also had one of those small cocktail hats that had a long black lace veil over her face. She had a long dark brown hair that was all pulled to the side over her shoulder. And she stood there holding her hands in front of her, staring at the plot. She was still there when we started making our rounds. It was closer to the front, so I decided to walk over to her, hoping that I could comfort her as well. And as I got closer to her, I heard one of the groundskeepers holler out for me. I turned around, giving them a look of, "Seriously?" Because I felt it was rude to shout like that, but by the time that I turned back around, the woman was gone. I looked around for a moment trying to see if I could find her, but she was nowhere. So I turned around to walk back towards the groundskeeper, and I was about to tell him to not shout like that when he apologized and said he thought that it was okay since there was no one around. That's when I immediately mentioned the woman that was standing there, and his only response was, "What woman?" And at first I was confused, but it quickly clicked in my mind. I apologized to him and again just advised to avoid shouting on the grounds while we were open. We finished up for the evening and started to leave when I was driving by the side of the grounds and saw this woman standing there again. I had to know for sure what I was seeing, so I pulled over. I walked up to the fence line and stared at her for a few seconds. And after a while, I watched her turn around, walk off behind our big center oak tree, and then she was gone. And I drove around as far to the other side so I could see if she just went over to the other side, but she wasn't there. The next day, I went in and checked the books to see whose plot she was at. The plot belonged to a gentleman that was born in the 50s, and his wife and children survived him, so I was stumped as to who this woman would be. I started going back through the records to learn and found out his mother had passed away when he was still a child, and you guessed it, she was buried here as well. I went to find her plot and learned that it was on the opposite side of that oak tree. My guess is that she was here and was waiting to meet her son again. I still see her in passing, but I always let her have her space. It doesn't seem like she wants company, so I respect her space and try to tell others as well, the best that I can. We have had a few people say that they've seen her, and we've had a small talk for those that I know that are gifted like me. So, these were two experiences that have stuck with me since my time here, especially since they are two recurring events. It's not hard to open up and realize that we are not alone here, especially in my field. I feel it has drawn me closer to the paranormal, and I welcome the opportunity to possibly learn about someone's life and help celebrate it. It never fails to amaze me how brave some people are in public, especially towards other people such as myself. I started working at Walmart a few years out of high school, so barely 21. I definitely ran into some jerks before, but the creepy old guys were the kicker. What's worse is how they didn't seem to care who else was around to witness this. I started working in the fitting rooms, and we saw plenty of people attempt to do inappropriate things in it. Those are stories for another day though. I eventually transferred to customer service because I was tired of being the one to call maintenance in the fitting rooms. And before Walmart had the specific money service center, we did it at customer service. So, money orders, money transfers, and even some utility payments. We started getting this one guy that just looked slimy as hell. He always wore jeans and a nasty tank top. His hair was really long and stringy, like he was washed twice a year, but usually pulled it back into a ponytail. He would hit on all the younger girls and treat the older ones like dirt, if he couldn't just avoid them. He started coming up to customer service to be rang up when the lines were long because he learned that we won't turn people down. When it was just me there, he'd always be leaning over the counter smirking, and he always called me babe, which alone was creepy and made me feel gross. Unfortunately, he had more reason to go to customer service because he started doing money transfers too. Those started becoming real suspicious too, and he could tell that I was onto him. There were always even amounts, always under the amount that we had to report, and he always made it out to people and the names were never the same. I tried to play dumb once, since he had sent well over 10 grand within a week, and I acted concerned for him, saying, "Do you know the people you're sending money to?" And I mentioned how there have been a lot of scammers. He smirked and said yeah, that they're his employees, and that this was the fastest way that he can pay them. I thought not really, but hey, it was none of my business, so I just dropped it for now. However, he continued coming in and continued to be a creep, and I was getting fed up with it. I mentioned it to someone else that worked there about how the money transfers were really sus, but she just shrugged it off. The problem with at least the store I worked at was that nobody seemed to care. If it didn't directly affect them, they didn't bother with anything. So I figured out how to file a report myself on the money transfers, and I did. And in the meantime, he continued to show up there. However, things got worse. We all wore name tags so he could see our first name, but not our last. Yet one time, he came in to do another money transfer, and he started handing me the paper. He took his sunglasses off and said, "Let's do this without the small talk today, Miss Anderson." How the hell did he know my last name? I just stared at him for a second before continuing. It was obvious at this point to him that he was correct, and I completed it without another word to him and continued on with my day. I again told my coworker when they came in and said that he probably just saw it somewhere or overheard someone else say it. I didn't believe this because I had no reason to use my last name, but I could do nothing about it. From then on, he would come in and make more gross comments to me, call me babe, and make kissing faces even at me. At one point, I was already having a bad day when I saw him in line, so I called up my manager and told them that they need to ring him up because I was no longer comfortable doing it. And their idea of doing that was to look over the form, check his ID, and then hand it to me saying do it. Furiously, I did so, as he leaned against the counter and chuckled. He then said that I was too smart and pretty to be working here and that he could get me a good paying job with my looks. I looked him straight in the eyes and said no thanks and didn't say another word to him. That night, as I was walking to my car to leave, I noticed an envelope on my windshield. As stupid as it was, I looked around, got in my car, and I opened it. It was a card saying happy birthday with a hotel card in it with a room number written on it. The card said something like, "In case you change your mind." The part that freaked me out the most was that my birthday was tomorrow. Granted, I had no proof, but I knew that it had to be this guy. And not only did he know my full name, but he also knew what I drove in my birthday. I started crying in my car. I lived alone, so I had no one to turn to or talk to about this other than my mom. And she suggested that I call the police, but I had no evidence that it was even this guy. And besides, he hasn't done anything specifically to me, so I know that they wouldn't do much. I did start having this guy that did cards walk me to my car, just in case. He was one of the few people there that I liked and believed me. And I quit shortly after and started working with my mom because I just didn't want to see this guy anymore. I hope he got caught because I never want to see him again. And I hope that he didn't put anyone else through this. So, the wonderful Walmart was my first real job. I started working there shortly after graduating high school and continued to for a little over 3 years. I was younger, as mentioned, right out of high school, so maybe a little naive and didn't run into many serious conflicts, so I didn't know how to react to some situations. But I quickly learned. Walmart makes you grow up pretty fast as an employee. I'm sure others will relate to that. And I bring this up because of these two memorable experiences that I encountered during my time working there. The first one was about a year into me working there. A young child around a year old in a neighboring city had gone missing. There was a lot of speculation around the whole situation, from the mother being suspicious, and even cadaver dogs alerting authorities to specific spots in their home. But sadly, they never found anything on the property or any evidence to make an arrest at that time. This case was always fresh in my mind as I worked the early shift and heard about it on the news every morning before I left for work. I was a cashier and also work at the customer service desk on occasions. I see a lot of people coming in with their kids, and most of the younger ones that are in the cart like to watch the big carousel as it spins. Sometimes they talk to me, and their parents always smile and try to be part of the conversation as well. Especially with the smaller babies that can't talk, but they smile and laugh, so it makes for a good time. But on one occasion though, I had an older lady come in with a small infant. The woman looked old enough to be the grandparent to this child. Now, of course, this wasn't an unusual situation, but something just really felt off. When she first pulled into my checkout lane, she was focused on the child, smiling. I greeted her, and she started putting stuff on the belt. She bought a lot of clothes, a baby mattress, diapers, formula, and even toys. And I thought it was a bit odd for the amount. I've seen grandparents, friends, aunts, and etc. bring in a small child and buy them an outfit or a toy or something, but never a full wardrobe. So maybe the parents were a little down on their luck and she was trying to help them out? But still, the kid was small, as she definitely looked too old to still be on formula alone, but that was the only type of food she bought. Other than the item she bought, she didn't talk much, and she would not take the child out of her sight. After sitting down every item, she would look up at the baby, and once she pulled the cart up to the carousel, I looked over at her to see if maybe the kid looked upset or was being playful or something, but she just looked around and looked at me. You know that look infants get when they're confused or scared? Right before they burst out crying. Yeah, that's what she looked like. She just looked like she didn't know what was going on. And the woman, now waiting on me to finish ringing everything up, is staring at this child again, rubbing her head, smiling, but not saying anything to her. Once I finished ringing everything up, I tried to put the items back in her cart, and she stopped me quickly by saying, "It's okay, I got it, don't worry about it." Which was a little weird. Rarely people don't stop me from loading up their groceries, but I let it go. She gave me a credit card to pay, and at that time our machines did ask for an ID if they used a credit card, and the amount was over a certain amount. When I asked for her ID, she became flustered and started looking around her purse for it. After a few seconds, she asked to just pay in cash, which she then pulled out a wad of bills. I completed the order, and she started leaving so quick that she almost forgot a bag and a receipt. And so after she left, my line was empty again. It was around 6 or 7 in the morning, so we were really slow at that time, and when this happens, I start to straighten out my lane where all the impulse items were, including the magazines. And that's when I looked over at the magazine covers to see the face of the missing baby. And I realized why that encounter was so off to me. That baby looked just like the missing one that has been on the news lately. She had the bright green eyes and the light curly hair that was starting to grow. She was from a city less than 30 minutes from here too. The part that started worrying me more was that this child looked confused. She didn't look like she was particularly happy or comforted by seeing this woman, but she also wasn't crying or screaming. Another thing was that the missing child had a birthmark on the back of her neck. Could that be why this woman didn't want me to go to the back of the cart and see the back of the baby's head? Obviously, this didn't dawn on me at that time, so I didn't even look at her to check. Then there was the fact that she was also worried about showing her ID and wanted to leave so quickly. Both were very suspicious. And lastly, the items she bought were just too much to be as a random gift. Of course, this was all me just speculating, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I just let someone go that could have been related to this case. It's been 10 years now since that case, and this child still has not been found. I can only hope it was unfortunate coincidences, but part of me still wonders, what could have happened if I reported this? I will say I'm a female. I'm 18 to 20 years old at that time, so it was a normal thing to have both men and women call me sweetie, hun, baby, and etc. Most of the time it was fine. Usually it's the older people who do so no harm done. And every once in a while, I get an older guy that may call me beautiful, but I moved on. However, this guy was more persistent. The first time he came through my line, he says, "Well, good morning, beautiful." I smile and I said good morning back, asking him how he is, normal small talk stuff. And this guy was older too, like old enough to be my grandfather. I know this not only by the way he looks, but he even makes that comment. He even went as far to say something about, "You wouldn't want to be with someone like me, not at my age." And by the end of his purchase, I hand him his receipt and he holds out his hand to shake mine. It was kinda weird, but I held it out. He put his other hand over mine like he was cupping it, and as he looks at my name badge, he says something like, "Well, it's a pleasure to meet you, Marie. See you next time." And I again smile and say, "Same to you, have a good day." And I move on with my day. But not only a few hours later, this guy is back and in my line. He is literally only buying a soda from one of the small cases right up front by the registers. I remember this because I thought, why go to a Walmart for a single soda when you could have just gone to a gas station or something? When it was his turn, he said, "We meet again." And I just smiled and made a comment about, "Miss me that much?" And to my surprise, he actually answered, "Yes, actually." It was awkward as he tried to make small talk, but we were busy at that point, so he was trying to stand next to my register and talk while I'm still ringing up other customers. I think he finally took the hint that I couldn't really talk, so he just said, "Well, I'll let you get back to work. Good night, Marie." and then he left. This guy was already making me feel weird when he said my name, but I did my best to ignore it. Sadly, this continued as mentioned for months, and he would be there several times a week, and he would always end up in my line just buying random things. He even tried to buy a box of Valentine candies, and afterwards, as I handed him the bag, he said that they were for me for his Valentine. I, of course, refused it. I told him that I could not take gifts from customers, and I was also happily taken. And this seemed to upset him a bit. He made a comment about how it was rude to not accept a gift in his religion, and that he wanted to speak to my manager to convince them to let me have it. I finally got a manager, and they insisted that I could not take it. He finally accepted that answer, but said that he wanted to return it and get a refund. I remember him throwing a fit because he had to go to my customer service instead of through me to do so, so he just left with it. At this point, I told my manager about this guy and how he made me feel so uncomfortable, and they said that if it's ever too much to call them over, and they will switch me out so I don't ring him up. I thought that was fair, and I left it at that. And this night in particular, my fiancé had to take me to work and pick me up because of my car issues. And as I was leaving the store for the night, my fiancé was actually walking in when I noticed the creepy guy was sitting on a bench by the carts. And of course, he noticed me. So as he started getting up, I was close enough that I did a fast walk to my fiancé and I hugged him, making it very obvious to this guy. He saw this and just stared at me. So he walked around the store and I told him about the guy and agreed that if he was going to start sitting out there or causing any more problems like that he will park and come in to walk me out of the car until we felt that it was safe again. Well, sadly, this guy did not stop. I never saw him waiting around by the doors anymore, but he would continue to show up around the store and try to go in my lane. He would make it there sometimes, and he was never short on questions to ask me about my personal life, but I never gave him any answers. If anything, they were vague. But still, he didn't stop. When they would switch me out though, he would holler at me as I was walking away from the register, saying things like, "Where are you going? I miss you. Are they doing this to us on purpose?" Like we were a thing or something. It was awful, and he started making me dread coming to work. I even felt bad for one cashier as she was swapping out with me, and he was one behind the current customer. He lost it. He started laying into this cashier, calling her so many awful names and slamming the items down on the belt. I went and told the manager before I went and hid for a while, and I think he was told to calm down or he would be told to leave. They rarely banned or kicked people out. It was always just empty threats. But I was so happy when I was finally transferred to customer service, as I didn't hardly see him at all after that. I would see him passing by and wave at me, but at that point, I stopped caring and wouldn't even acknowledge him. I don't know if I just blanked him out that much or if he moved on to someone else, but thankfully, I didn't see him the last few months that I worked there at Walmart. I was lucky enough to work at Walmart for 4 years. These are a few experiences that I have had just from those few years. I started there working the evenings, usually noon to 9 p.m. or as late as 3 p.m. to midnight. The first one I recall was closer to when I started, which is why it was so memorable. I was a cashier and eventually also worked in customer service, so I was all over the front end. It was my first job, so I took it seriously, and I was proud of it too. I did a great job. Well, at least according to my reviews. I was polite, friendly, and fast at bringing people up. I got a few people that I called my regulars, some of them that price matched, if that tells you how long ago this was, and some of them also did extreme couponing. Some of them were definitely unbearable, the ones that are unorganized and nitpicky on the order. You ring everything up and bag them, but I dealt with each one as best as I could. One lady, though, made it to where I cringed anytime someone pulled out their binder of coupons afterwards. She came in probably every 2 weeks with a small child in the basket part of the cart, not in the front where you would normally see a kid. He was holding an old tablet that was not in good condition. The screen was spider webbing in one corner, and it looked like the plastic frame was splitting apart too, but he was still watching or playing something on it, and the volume on full blast too. He hardly looked up from it. His legs were pulled up towards him, probably because he didn't have any room, as this did not stop his mom from filling the cart up with items. Not just dry foods, but raw meats and produce too. The lady was always very organized. As she laid her items on the belt, she made sure to tell people behind her that she was going to be a while, and they usually left my lane. If you reached over to grab a different item, she would flip. She would yell slightly to say, "Stop," or "Don't," or give you some kind of lecture about doing items in order, but without ever making eye contact with you. She would keep looking down on the floor or her purse or something. So I learned and kept everything in order and bagged as she requested it. I never really had any more of an issue other than that, so my co-workers teased that I was her favorite. However, that would soon change. She came in as normal. The kid is covered in food, playing on his tablet. Mom is organizing the items on the belt. I picked up 2 packs of cookies, and then I noticed that the coupon on it was a buy one get one. But I noticed too that it had expired by 3 days. When I looked up, I told the woman that I wouldn't be able to accept it since it expired, and she yelled, "What?" and immediately snatched it from my hand. She looked at it and told me that I was wrong and to try it again. I again apologized and told her that there was nothing to try as it was expired, so we couldn't accept it. She began arguing about what day it was, telling me that my register obviously had the wrong date. I again had to explain that wasn't possible and even showed her the date on my phone to prove it. And from there, she lost it. She started screaming about how I was incompetent and a liar, and that Walmart's brainwashing had finally gotten to me too. And at this point, I called for a manager. I had only been there for around 6 months, but this was the most confrontation that I had come across, and I didn't know how to handle it. Thankfully, the manager's podium was within my view, so they could see the look on my face and started coming over fairly quickly. And when they arrived, she immediately directed her anger to the manager, saying that I was refusing to take her coupon. I tried explaining the situation to the manager when this lady pulled a steak knife from her purse. My manager immediately called security on the walkies and tried calming her down. She was pointing it at us, screaming that we were trying to ruin her and cause her to lose her kid. And this whole time, I kid you not, this kid has not looked up once. He continued to play on his tablet. He was not fazed at all, which sadly made me feel like he was used to this from her. At this point, the whole store seemed quiet, but her screaming and my manager trying to calm her down. There were people all around recording and taking pictures, which only seemed to make her angrier. And after what felt like forever, she tried to run towards my manager with a knife raised when another customer saw this and bravely tackled her to the ground. The knife slid away from her and my manager put his shoe onto it to hold it there. And thankfully, 2 cops walked in as this was occurring and quickly took over. This whole time, again, the kid still has not looked up. A cop actually had to come up and grab the kid out of the cart before he even looked up. The mom was already outside, but I would expect a kid like him to be crying or scared, but he didn't even ask for his mom. It was actually sad. I don't know what happened to her or the kid afterwards, but I think CPS showed up to take the kid. These next 2 are from my late night shifts. Maybe not necessarily dangerous people, but definitely ones that I wouldn't approach on my own. This first one is the lady my coworkers nicknamed Gucci Grandma. We called her that because she always came in around midnight with the flashiest clothes on. Typically, it was a really tight pencil skirt, heels or knee-high boots, and some kind of shirt, and she had to have a dozen of those fuzzy half jackets. At this point, I swear I have seen one in each color, some with different patterns or sequins, and she had those giant sunglasses on. And as I mentioned, it was midnight. Her hair was also a sight. It was shorter and gray, but it was usually pulled up in a tall bun. Think beehive style. Then, she always had a bright red lipstick and very pink cheeks, like way too much blush. In the rare occasion that she takes off her sunglasses, she also has eyeshadow on to the extreme. So while her look is pretty out there, that's not the weirdest part. She always comes in with what looks like one of those cheap children's toy strollers with something wrapped in blankets sitting in it. We couldn't tell if it was a real child at first until one of my friends in the fitting rooms area saw her swiftly shushing something and grabbing it. And when she lifted it up, it turned out to be a baby doll. But the baby doll was creepy as hell. It looked really old, like it was covered in dirt or soot. Its hair was a mess and tangled, and it was definitely not making any noises. But she kept swinging it and shushing it like it was alive. My friend tried to not make eye contact and just kept working on her stuff when she walked up to her and apologized for all the noise, saying that she gets cranky around this time. My friend said she didn't know what to do but smile and say that it's okay. And we saw her many times after this shopping, browsing aisles, talking to the doll, and even taking pictures with it. It became a normal thing, as weird as it looked. But the last time we could account for her, she came in looking rough. Her hair was a mess. It wasn't in her normal bun, but it was frizzy and standing up like she stuck a fork in a socket. Her jacket was really dirty, and her shirt was stained. Her skirt was torn on the side and she was barefoot. She still had her glasses on, but her lipstick was almost gone. All this, but she still pushed her stroller with the baby doll. We just stared for a while when I decided to ask if she was okay. We may have teased her in the past, but I actually felt bad at this point. When I approached her to ask, she shushed me, patted my head, and whispered everything would be alright. She left after buying a package of Band-Aids, and we never saw her again. I don't know whatever happened to her, but I do kind of miss seeing her, and I hope that nothing bad happened to her. And the last one was more odd than anything. We were just starting to switch over to the night shifts, so around 10, and we had a ton of people in checkout all at once, so I was asked to stay a bit longer to help bring it down. I didn't pay much attention to the actual people in line because I was just ready to go. But I noticed the customers stopped talking to me as well. I soon learned why, as a cart pulled up and slammed down 2 huge boxes of diapers. It made me jump, and I looked to see who this jerk was, when I saw some middle-aged balding guy in a trench coat putting stuff on the belt with a full-grown woman sitting in the cart. Not only was she sitting there, but she had her hair in two side pigtails. She was wearing an adult diaper with a weird tutu-style skirt and a sports bra. And not only this, but she also had a pacifier in her mouth. I didn't know what to say or how to react, so I just kept bringing up their items. Diapers, baby bottles, wipes, teething rings, and a camera. Those I remember specifically. The woman just stared at me with empty eyes. When he noticed me staring at her, he said something like, "Ah, isn't she precious?" and then rubbed her cheek. She didn't budge, didn't flinch, smile, or etc. I just continued with the purchase and gave him his receipt. And as they strolled away, she smiled at me and he didn't even look back. It was creepy as hell, but thankfully, I never saw them again. I got a job at Walmart in 2019 working as a cashier. I was laid off and I decided to get what I could at that time just to get some extra money so my husband wasn't the only one working. It was really alright for the most part. In 2020, I started helping more at the doors with counting how many people were coming and going and to make sure that they were wearing masks. It was alright for the most part. You got an occasional person that will lose their mind when you offered sanitizer or a mask, but it was tolerable. However, I did see people do some crazy things while just walking around on my lunch or breaks. At one point, when people started freaking out about the toilet paper issues and thinking that we were going to be locked down for months, things started to be too much. The store was a mess. Shelves were already empty and people were losing their minds. There was one night in particular that I remember walking to the back to go on break, and when I was walking past the toilet paper and paper towel aisles, there was one lady that was crying as she pushed the cart with a single gallon of milk in it, and a kid in the front of it licking the cart handle, touching the shelves and sticking his hands in his mouth. I overheard a couple debating if they should try using paper towels instead or go somewhere else first. I saw people fighting over sanitizer and the kid next to them screaming at their parents to stop. These were all upsetting to see, but it didn't stop there. One night, I was talking to my friend that was stocking shelves after I was off work. They were stocking toilet paper of all things, and there was a guy that came in from the other end of the aisle and slowly made his way towards us as he looked at the shelves. He eventually got right next to my friend, like within arm's length, and I motioned with my head to my friend that he was right by him, so he stood up and asked if there was something that he could help with. The guy went off. He started getting angry, claiming that we were holding back inventory on purpose to make people like him suffer. My friend and I were equally confused since he was literally stocking the shelves at that time. He tried calming him down, but the guy must have seen the box cutter sitting on the shelf, and then he snapped. He stepped backwards and pulled out like a switchblade, saying, "Let's have a real knife fight." And my friend grabbed the pocket knife, and we walked backwards as we tried to calm the guy down. He didn't really pay much attention to me, so I was able to pull out my phone and call 911. Someone else that worked there must have heard what was going on, and they rushed over to help us out as well. Somehow, we finally got the guy to put the knife away, but the police still came and arrested him. I know 2020 has been one hell of a year, but some people just snapped. I quit shortly after this because I couldn't risk any more weird occurrences like that. And all I can say though is be safe out there, watch your surroundings, and be kind to others. Hello everyone, it's your creepy sister here. Thank you so much for watching the video. I really appreciate each and every one of you. But I would also like to thank my amazing patrons, my top tippers, and my dearest channel members. Thank you very, very much. I really appreciate it with all of my heart. If you want to support the channel further, you could also choose to become a patron, a tipper, or a channel member. But remember, it's appreciated, but never a requirement. I would also like to announce that we have merch now. The link is in the description of the video, along with all my other social media links, like my Discord server, Twitter, Instagram, and others. You can connect with me and send your stories there. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't yet, and comments are highly appreciated. And remember, your fear feeds me.